In this video, we see the Russian Grad BM-21 launches several rockets and then move to the next firing position. But on its way, it is intercepted by a Ukrainian drone. Upon impact, the remaining ammunition in the installation detonates. Using a combination of an FPV drone and a shaped charge projectile, Ukrainians have destroyed hundreds of Russian tanks and numerous other valuable military vehicles. When Ukrainians attached a shaped charge projectile from an RPG-7 to a drone, it became a real breakthrough in military tactics. This 2.5 kilogram projectile can penetrate armor up to 50 millimeters thick, meaning any Russian tank. Its use almost always results in the instant destruction of the tank and the removal of its turret. Now observe how the method of waging war has evolved over the past 2 years. At the beginning of the war, we all thought that the most critical weapon to repel Russian tanks was the Javelin anti-tank system. Now, we see how Ukrainian soldiers managed to stop any Russian tank with just FPV drones. A bit later, it was considered that artillery was the most crucial weapon in the confrontation between the two armies. But now, we begin to understand that FPV drones even have an advantage over artillery. Drones move faster than tanks, maneuver excellently, and hit targets with high precision. You can hide from artillery shells in a trench or bunker, while hiding from an FPV drone is impossible anywhere. Like these, they can fly into even the smallest openings and destroy the enemy's live forces. Moreover, any FPV drone with explosives will not exceed the cost of $1,000, while any Western projectile costs more than $50,000, and the Javelin ATGM cost over $80,000. Mentioning the high maneuverability of FPV drones, note how skillfully they fly into Russian armored vehicles and detonate them. Artillery is incapable of such actions. Understanding how the rules of warfare had changed, both Ukrainians and Russians have ramped up the mass production of these FPV drones. Even if Ukraine stops receiving artillery ammunition and javelins, it can continue repelling Russian attacks for a long time, solely with the help of drones. Watch this video. An FPV drone narrowly missed hitting a Russian Su-25 fighter jet. The aircraft managed to evade the drone at the last moment. Here, we see how a Ukrainian FPV drone narrowly avoided colliding with the Russian Ka-52 helicopter. There's no doubt that in the near future, Ukrainians will be downing Russian frontline aviation with drones. Russian aviation has to fly at low altitudes to avoid being targeted by air defense systems, but flying low makes them vulnerable to Ukrainian FPV drones. Russians filmed on the same road where the column of their armored vehicles was destroyed, and we can see the losses they suffered. Here's another example of how a drone equipped with a regular grenade can outmatch a tank. This Russian tank attacked a Ukrainian bunker and received a drone strike directly into the tank's engine compartment. As a result, the tank became immobilized. The Russians fired 2 more shots, after which they had to abandon the tank and flee. Of course, later, the Ukrainians set fire to the abandoned tank. And finally, I want to show you another Russian attack that was thwarted solely by drones. This took place near Avdiivka in January of this year. The Russians behaved strangely and disorganized right from the start of the attack. They themselves damaged one of their tanks without an obvious reason. But when they entered the gray zone and began to approach the Ukrainian positions, a swarm of Ukrainian drones simply started destroying them one by one. The Ukrainians managed to reach and strike with a drone even the tank that the Russians had damaged before the battle. About half an hour later, all the Russian tanks were knocked out and ablaze. The battlefield was shrouded in smoke. But let's get back to shape-charged projectiles. Interestingly, the Ukrainian algorithm works not only against Russian tanks, but also against any Russian armored vehicles. Take a look. The Russian APC-3 is carrying out a combat mission, attacking, firing at Ukrainian trenches, probably loaded with ammunition. But the Ukrainian FPV drone sneaked up from behind and hits it right in the turret. The APC exploded along with the ammunition. The shape-charged projectile easily penetrates the armor of any Russian armored vehicle. And this is the Russian self-propelled Howitzer 2S-19. The FPV drone with a shape-charged projectile hits the howitzer from the front. The strike causes an instantaneous detonation of the ammunition. The drone easily penetrates the armor of the howitzer. Even if an immediate explosion doesn't occur, it will happen minutes later. Whether it's a howitzer or a tank. Or even an abandoned but loaded with ammunition known as howitzer. But my favorite is the destruction of the Russian multiple launch rocket system, Solntsepek, which uses reactive thermobaric missiles. Look, this video was shot last summer. Solntsepek is on a combat mission. The installation is fully loaded with 24 rockets. The Ukrainian FPV drone hits it directly in the ignition mechanism. As a result of the hit, all the rockets exploded. And the two more Russian armored vehicles were on a mission. The first one exploded on a mine and was hit by a drone. The second one was simply abandoned in the middle of the road by a frightening crew. Then the Ukrainian FPV drone set it on fire. Engulfed in flames, the Russian armored personnel carrier burned brightly for a long time. This Russian APC was supposed to transport soldiers to the front line, but was blown up on a mine along with its ammunition. Another APC was following it and also exploded on a mine. Then all the ammunition inside detonated. What a sad fate awaits the Russians. These two Russian tanks were supposed to attack from a different direction, but the first tank exploded on a mine. The second tank felt the merciless strike of a Ukrainian drone. The attack failed. Another tank was hit by an FPV drone and caught fire. It's amazing how a few drones can halt any Russian invasion. Russians lost a lot of armored vehicles around the town of Krenki, but still couldn't reach their goal. Within the town limits, Russian tanks have no chance of avoiding defeat from ubiquitous Ukrainian drones. After infiltrating the town, the Russians set up a bunker in an abandoned house, but a HIMARS missile turns them into powder. Another house with Russians inside also turns into dust. And one more time. Krenki has already become a new graveyard for Russian tanks. In their attempt to eliminate the Ukrainian foothold, the Russians are losing more than expected. It's a big question. Can the Russian industry replenish such losses? This Ukrainian soldier shared a story of how he alone managed to thwart a Russian attack. After aerial reconnaissance spotted the advance of Russian armored vehicles, he used a Javelin missile to destroy one APC and one tank. The crew of the leading tank fled. Then, Russians continued with 4 more APCs. The soldier disabled one of them with a Javelin missile. The remaining APCs on the battlefield were burned using grenade-dropping methods. A tank battle occurred on the border between Russia and Ukraine. A pro-Ukrainian Russian group conducted a tank attack on the border checkpoint. Using several tanks, they invaded Russian territory and targeted fire-struck Russian border guards. The Russians did not expect the attack in this location, so frightened, they abandoned the border checkpoint and fled. But in attempting to advance further, one of the tanks hit a mine. The tank crew was forced to abandon the tank and return to the rear. Meanwhile, the Russians were contemplating how to repel the attack. They also wanted to take the damaged tank as a trophy, but concluded that evacuating the tank at the moment was impossible and decided to destroy it. The Russians had no other means to destroy the tank besides a grenade, but that proved to be sufficient. While the tank was burning, the Russians attempted to repel the invasion. They deployed a Su-34 aircraft equipped with heavy glide bombs FAB-250 and began bombing the border checkpoint on their territory. Look at how the bomb wings unfold. The Russians are not afraid to drop bombs on their own territory, destroying their infrastructure, just to stop the enemy's invasion as quickly as possible. Also, take a look at how a Russian army tank is shooting at the homes of Russian citizens, destroying them completely. The next day, another tank was set on fire, followed by the destruction of another APC. Aren't these wonderful results achieved by Ukrainian soldiers? Watch how skillfully the Ukrainian FPV drone, resembling a bee, selects its target for the strike. It managed to ignite the new Russian APC on the first attempt. Similar scenes are unfolding on other parts of the front line. For every kilometer they advance, the Russians lose hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles as well as thousands of soldiers. Losing equipment at such a rate, Russians will need at least 50 years to win this war. In 2 years of full-scale warfare, they haven't achieved a single one of their goals. Not a single one. Another interesting fact: when Russian soldiers abandon their armored vehicles, they usually seek shelter from Ukrainian FPV drones. This could be trenches or partially destroyed buildings. However, Ukrainian defenders have devised special ammunition with an incendiary mixture. Attacking Russians with such weapons literally sends them into hell. And all of this is to make Russians regret their invasion of Ukraine every single day. Also, what's even more important, Ukrainian forces are striking Russian territory daily. Here's another example of how a massive tank attack was repelled solely by FPV drones. In January of this year, the Russians attacked Avdiivka from different directions. The Russians deployed dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, but the Ukrainians were prepared for this attack and had stocked up on a sufficient number of FPV drones. To repel a large-scale attack, it's crucial to have various combinations of mini drones, but most importantly, to have at least a few drones equipped with shaped charge warheads. This is necessary to explode at least a few tanks and intimidate the Russians. Then they are more likely to abandon their armored vehicles and flee. The sight of a blown-up tank on the battlefield really sends shivers down the spine. So the Russians abandon their tanks and flee, unwilling to be caught in a burning tank. In that case, Ukrainians can save on FPV drones. After all, abandoned tanks can be set on fire in a simpler way, by tossing a grenade into the hatch, and that is usually sufficient. So, when the Russians attack, the main goal is to blow up one or several of their tanks. Then, they start to panic and scatter, abandoning their armored vehicles on the battlefield. After that, this armor can be destroyed using cheaper FPV drones or by throwing grenades. The drones hover over the battlefield like wasps and destroy one tank after another until they burn them all down. This is what modern warfare looks like. Later, Ukrainians found 2 more brand new Russian tanks abandoned by the Russians out of fear. A drone ignited one of the tanks, causing it to burn like a torch, so that the Russians could see from a distance that their attack had failed. First, see how FPV drones attack Russian tanks but can't cause significant damage. Sometimes, the tank can be damaged but not destroyed. Russians abandon such tanks on the battlefield, and they can be destroyed with another type of drone, dropping a grenade into the tank turret hatch. This tactic has proven effective, but it's not the best approach. Once, Ukrainians came up with something truly amazing. An algorithm that allows turning Russian tanks into flaming scrap metal with a single hit. What if you attach a shaped charge projectile from an RPG-7 to the drone? It's an anti-tank rocket-propelled grenade designed specifically for penetrating tank armor. And what if you direct this projectile right into the base of the Russian tank's turret, into the rear area of the tank? Exactly. The tank will be immediately destroyed. The Ukrainians managed to reach and strike with a drone even the tank that the Russians had damaged before the battle. About half an hour later, all the Russian tanks were knocked out and ablaze. The battlefield was shrouded in smoke. But let's get back to shaped charge projectiles. Interestingly, the Ukrainian algorithm works not only against Russian tanks, but also against any Russian armored vehicles. Take a look. The Russian APC-3 is carrying out a combat mission, attacking, firing at Ukrainian trenches, probably loaded with ammunition. But the Ukrainian FPV drone sneaked up from behind and hits it right in the turret. The APC exploded along with the ammunition. The shaped charge projectile easily penetrates the armor of any Russian armored vehicle. And this is the Russian self-propelled howitzer 2S-19. The FPV drone with a shaped charge projectile hits the howitzer from the front. The strike causes an instantaneous detonation of the ammunition. The drone easily penetrates the armor of the howitzer. Even if an immediate explosion doesn't occur, it will happen minutes later. Whether it's a howitzer or a tank, or even an abandoned but loaded with ammunition known a howitzer. But my favorite is the destruction of the Russian multiple launch rocket system, Solntsepek, which uses reactive thermobaric missiles. Look, this video was shot last summer. Solntsepek is on a combat mission. The installation is fully loaded with 24 rockets. The Ukrainian FPV drone hits it directly in the ignition mechanism. As a result of the hit, all the rockets exploded. And the 2 more Russian armored vehicles were on a mission. The first one exploded on a mine and was hit by a drone. The second one was simply abandoned in the middle of the road by a frightening crew. Then the Ukrainian FPV drone set it on fire. Engulfed in flames, the Russian armored personnel carrier burned brightly for a long time. This Russian APC was supposed to transport soldiers to the front line, but was blown up on a mine along with its ammunition. Another APC was following it and also exploded on a mine. Then all the ammunition inside detonated. a sad fate awaits the Russians. These two Russian tanks were supposed to attack from a different direction, but the first tank exploded on a mine. The second tank felt the merciless strike of a Ukrainian drone. The attack failed. Another tank was hit by an FPV drone and caught fire. It's amazing how a few drones can halt any Russian invasion. Russians lost a lot of armored vehicles around the town of Krenki, but still couldn't reach their goal. Within the town limits, Russian tanks have no chance of avoiding defeat from ubiquitous Ukrainian drones. The thing is, the shaped charge projectile penetrates the tank's armor and hits the ammunition inside, causing an immediate detonation. So in addition to defeating the tank, we also get a spectacular explosion, all thanks to the right algorithm. This Russian tank was blown up in the exact same way. A drone with a shaped charge projectile hit the tank's vulnerable spot from behind. One vivid example of this tactic was captured last summer. A Russian tank was on a mission with a full load of ammunition. A Ukrainian FPV drone armed with a shaped charge grenade hit the tank from behind at the base of the turret, resulting in an immediate detonation of all the tank's ammunition. If there are no ammunition in the tank, it won't explode, but it will burn entirely, also become useless. Note that the drone strikes the rear part of the tank turret. This is the most vulnerable spot for Russian tanks. If the drone hits from the front, as you can see in this video, the tank may survive. The Russians install dynamic protection primarily on the front part of the tank. However, when the drone hits the tank in the rear part of the tunnel, it always catches fire. We've already seen numerous cases like these. And again, if there are ammunition in the tank, it leads to an immediate detonation and a massive explosion. Russians install electronic warfare systems on their tanks. Still, Ukrainian drones somehow overcome them. In this video, we see a drone hitting a tank equipped with an anti-drone system. From a distance, we see what happened to this tank. Perhaps it's the highest flight of a tank turret in history. It's worth mentioning another way to kill tanks. A small FPV drone armed with a single grenade can fly into the tank through the hatch in the turret. The grenade explodes and the tank burns. But if there are ammunition inside, they will definitely explode, rendering the tank useless. We are dealing with a new reality. It's amazing how a small FPV drone, which can be assembled by hand and then equipped with a regular grenade, can burn a 40-ton massive tank. Here's another such case. The drone literally fell into the turret hatch, and the tank caught fire from the grenade explosion. And after each attack, the Russians lose dozens of tanks and armored vehicles. Before your eyes are two abandoned Russian T-72 tanks. The first drone ignites one tank, while the second leads to a large explosion. Another tank attack failed. In the same location, a few days later, the Russians lost another entire column of armored vehicles. In this video, you can see how Ukrainians destroy abandoned APCs. Ukrainian forces are doing everything to make each meter of progress too costly for the Russians. I want to show you an interesting example of how an FPV drone helps in a crucial moment. About a month ago, the Russians attempted to capture a fortified Ukrainian position near Bakhmut. A Russian armored vehicle approached the Ukrainians closely and opened machine gun fire on them. The Russians were very close and ready to disembark to capture the Ukrainian bunker. But the Ukrainians launched a drone from the bunker and hit the Russian APC from behind. Inside the APC were at least 7 Russian assault troops. That's how just one drone stopped the Russians and saved the Ukrainian location. But that's not all. Not far from there was another Russian tank that was supposed to provide support. Seeing that the attack failed, the tank began to retreat, but it was caught up by the Ukrainian drone. All this means that 10 Russian soldiers, armed with a tank and APC, with plenty of ammunition inside, were unable to capture the Ukrainian bunker because of 2 FPV drones. In this video, you see the Russian T-80 tank. The crew of this tank does not know that in exactly 1 minute, they will disappear forever. A Ukrainian FPV drone is hunting this tank, equipped with a special shaped charge projectile capable of penetrating the armor of any Russian tank.
The flames intensify. The northern region. APCs fall into a trap. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone first blows up one. The second target. This APC thought it would find protection in a strip of forest. The APC is burned. And this is a strike on Russian logistical support, a truck carrying supplies. The Ukrainians sent a second drone. After meeting the truck, it flared up. Fire destroyed the entire vehicle. The Russians stopped to fix their truck. Ukrainians took advantage of the pause and delivered a devastating strike. The second and third drones do not yield significant results. After the fourth hit, the tank's armor gives in. Here is the outcome. A grenade flies into the tank. A beautiful bonfire. The second target, an APC stuck in a trench. It too burns to the ground. A meat pot tried to escape from the battlefield. Unsuccessfully. This APC was simply abandoned by the Russians on the road. They themselves hid in the woods. Interesting tactic. Another runner. After being hit, it stops. The second drone attacks. And a third. The APC is on fire. The fourth drone, a control hit. This APC was standing, waiting for its reckoning. Notice the mines. They are laid in 3 rows. The APC is destroyed. Nearby, the Russians abandoned an APC. How perfectly the operator drops a grenade into this Russian piece of junk. Did you notice the mines littering the field through which the Russians conducted their attack? It burns brilliantly. Another APC. At this moment, you can see the mines again. Now, the Ukrainians begin finishing off Russian tanks. Here, the Ukrainians finish off 2 tanks at once. One of the tanks explodes. FPV drones are already heading towards their targets. The APC becomes the first target. Another hit. The APC is stopped. Now it's the tank's turn. A direct hit. The APC is finished off. It's engulfed in flames. Now it's the turn of a tank and an APC. The Ukrainians waited for the Russians to come into the line of fire. It was difficult to hit them at the moment. When the tank came out, the Ukrainians made a successful attack. The APC continued moving forward. A kamikaze drone was on its tail. Hit confirmed. The tank, hit initially, was a T-90M. The drone attacked its rear turret. Another loss. Next up, the Madmen. A drone attacks an APC with a grill. The attack is successful. The APC stops. Another drone dives into it. Another T-90. It's easy to recognize by its unique turret. It is also destroyed. On the battlefield, many damaged but not destroyed tanks remain. While the Russians have retreated, it's necessary to destroy what they left behind in their fight. Thus, the Ukrainians will now be burning tank after tank, APC after APC, leaving nothing for the Russians. Yet ahead is still half a video with a large amount of destroyed Russian armor. A drone drops explosives into an APC. A fire starts immediately. A powerful explosion and detonation of ammunition occur. Am I the only one who likes watching such footage? That combination of fire and armored vehicles. There's something mesmerizing about it. It's target number 2's turn. The APC instantly ignites, and a powerful explosion follows immediately. I want to watch it again. Excellent. A crater is left in its place. Target 3. The flame gradually intensifies. Ammunition starts to detonate. It's beautiful. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone inspected the Russian tracked crematorium. Let's move now to another section of the front where constant fighting is taking place. These two APCs were stopped by mines. After one of them explodes, another explosion occurs. Pay attention to this exact moment here. An armor plate falls on a mine, hits it, and another explosion happens. This APC was carrying ammunition to Russian soldiers at their positions. Another pair of APCs. The drone first approaches from the left side, but the hit doesn't yield the desired result. Then, the Ukrainians send a second drone. This hit becomes fatal. Both APCs are destroyed. The Ukrainians thwarted the Russians' attempt to evacuate their damaged tank. The strike drone returns with explosives to prevent such attempts in the future. The mission was completed successfully. Ukrainians destroyed the Russian army not only with drones, but also with artillery. It all begins with tracking the enemy. This time, the Ukrainians discovered a control point with a Zala reconnaissance drone. The Ukrainians followed the Russians. When a vehicle with equipment arrives at the command post, the Ukrainians prepare HIMARS for a strike. One missile destroys the command post, the control point, and the equipment of the Russian army. The Russian column of tanks and APCs was spotted by the Ukrainians. They split into groups and attack from several directions at once. The first to come under fire is an APC. Next, the Ukrainians destroy a tank. This APC runs over mines. It turned into a crematorium on tracks. And this is a hit from a Javelin missile. The affected tank moves about 10 meters and stops. The Russians try to flee, but run into mines. Out of the entire column, only this armored personnel carrier manages to survive. It crosses the road and gets stuck. After suffering defeat during the day, the Russians start to attack at night. The tank leading the attack explodes on mines. It continues moving. Another explosion occurs, which the tank does not survive. The APC tries to bypass it and runs over mines as well. The armored group is now trapped. The Ukrainians use javelins, which work excellently at night. The attack ends with fireworks. The next morning, the Russians begin a new attack. Two APCs packed with paratroopers race across the open terrain. They are detected and try to break through with a fight. Kamikaze drones are directed at them. This is what the operator of a Ukrainian FPV drone sees.